I'm Jeff Hennig. I'm professor of political science and education at Teachers College at Columbia, and I'll be serving as facilitator for this meeting, which basically means introducing our panelists and then helping with the question and answers at the end. We've got a panel here with two presenters who will be presenting as a team. Jennifer Bell Ellwanger has served New York City Public Schools for more than 25 years. 15 years. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. Started as a kindergartner and currently leads the Research and Policy Support Group at the department as its executive director. That group is the primary source of research and analytics to inform system-wide policy decision-making. Ms. Bell Ellwanger is also a senior advisor to the Chancellor and serves as a special representative to the State Education Department to improve alignment between the city's reform efforts and those at the state and federal level. She began as an elementary classroom teacher and then an administrator in Community District 11 in Bronx, New York, and holds a position now as an adjunct faculty member at Fordham University's School of Education. The other half of the team is Catherine Brohorn, who joined the New York City Department of Education in May of 2010, where she serves as the Director of Research and Evaluation in the Research and Policy Support Group. She oversees the design and implementation of both internal and external program evaluations, and also serves on the Department of Education's Institutional Review Board for Protection of Human Subjects, and manages the department's qualification process for external evaluation services. Prior to coming to the Department of Education, she was a consultant at the Goodman Research Group in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She holds a PhD in experimental psychology with a focus on mental health. They've got a presentation that, as I said, they'll work on together, and I think the best way to do this would be to have them work through the presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions afterwards.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jeff. I was going to say the same thing, that we're going to go through the presentation for all of you. If you have questions that are relevant for clarification, please do stop us in the midst of the presentation. Otherwise, we hope with Jeff's help to work through discussion questions and conversations at the end of the presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to talk to you and provide you with some information about the New York City Department of Education's accountability tools and how we support schools in using those tools, both for accountability purposes, but more importantly, to drive student academic achievement and for instructional purposes. So I have many of my colleagues here in the audience today, so I think it will be great to hear from them at the end with some of their experiences with regard to many of the tools that we'll be talking about this afternoon. So for many of you may have heard this in some of our discussions this morning, where New York City DOE is short for the Department of Education staff have presented, but Children First Reform, which is what the New York City Department of Education has been has endeavored since 2003, is built on 3 pillars, and those are leadership, empowerment, and accountability. And through that circle, that's how we both drive performance, drive data into the schools, and how we help our leaders both understand student academic achievement, the progress, how to make that progress more accelerated, but also then in turn help schools with how to be accountable for those achievement outcomes. we hope and expect that our Children First reforms deliver and produce results. What we use to ensure that we are meeting the goals that we've set forth are through two primary measures: our high school graduation rates and our post-secondary outcomes. For us, with students graduating on time from high school within 4 years and then going on to academic success and achievement are the primary goals of our department. It doesn't stop at 12th grade. We want to make sure that they are successful when they go on to post-secondary careers and academics. Of course, there are many benchmarks along the way, and through the accountability tools that we'll share with you today, you'll see many of those benchmarks driven within the different accountability tools. We work through three main words as we go on through the accountability process in our tools. It's to evaluate, enforce, and enable. Through the evaluation, we're going to be focusing for a good part of our discussion today on our accountability measures, which include things, you may have heard about them before, a progress report, quality reviews, school surveys, and also our federal and state evaluation system. And all of those measures help schools understand where they are, where they need to go, and where they're struggling and where they are successful, both with their students and as a school, with students of all subgroups, and where they are successful as a whole. Through those evaluation measures, we then enforce through consequences. And consequences are both positive, and some are going to be, folks would consider to be more negative, and we'll talk about those a little bit. But we really, if you're going to be accountable for your results, then there should be consequences in order for those measures to be taken seriously at the school and at the principal and teacher level. Finally, through these tools, we expect and hope our schools will enable collaborative inquiry. By providing all of the data that we're going to share with you this afternoon, schools are able to come together both in teacher teams and senior leadership teams and really take a deep dive in the data, in the materials that we've provided to them to understand the strengths and weaknesses of their students in all of their special groups and be able to really dissect their achievement and make mid-course corrections where needed or plans for year-long achievement. Okay, so we went back to the benchmarks. Our first benchmark that we want to look at is students graduating from high school within 4 years from the New York City Department of Education. Here we have a lot of lines and one very long line. The New York City DOE has been calculating graduation rates since 1986. And what we want to show you here is the progress that we've made since 2002, 2003, when our Children First reforms began. If you can look all the way back here, between 1986 and about 2002, we had very little progress. We hovered at the 50% mark. That meant that only 50% of our students were graduating on time from high school within 4 years. Take a look at between 2002 and fast forward to 2009. You see that the academic achievement, the progress here of our students able to graduate on time has accelerated. And just in those very short years, we've gone from 51% to 68% of our students graduating on time. And if we look back, we see that that didn't happen for nearly 20 years. We really hovered at the 50% mark. And since 2002 onward, the gains have really jumped, and our students are graduating more frequently on time. There are 3 lines there, and I don't want to bog everyone down in lots of different footnotes and things. But so the New York City Department of Education has been tracking students' high school outcomes since before people knew how to track high school outcomes. We've had a longitudinal data system. We've been fortunate since 1986. The state instituted their 4-year calculations of the graduation rate in 2005. And that's the orange triangles that you see underneath that third line there, that's the state calculated method. It's slightly different, and we can talk about that a little bit towards the end, but even under those measures you see that the city has increased their graduation rates by nearly 27% since the time that it was implemented. Above those are green dots. Those green dots include August graduates. Beginning in 2008, the state agreed to include August graduates in their four-year definition of outcomes, and that's very important for the New York City Department of Education because we know and recognize that students both take longer than 4 years. We know we continue to calculate graduation rates until 5th and 6th years, but we also know that many students need to finish up some coursework or a Regents examination, which is required for graduation in that last summer. And we see that if you look at that 59% with June graduates, that increases to 63% after August. Another important benchmark for us is, are we seeing students increasing their enrollment in college directly out of the New York City public schools? If we are preparing our students, they should be able to enter into college ready to do the coursework. What we have seen at the City University of New York, CUNY, which is the New York City Department of Education's counterpart when we think about public education in New York City, we can see that a steady increase of our students have been enrolling at the City University as first-time freshmen beginning in 2002 through 2009. And more importantly, there are more than 6,000 Black and Hispanic New York City students graduating that had entered CUNY in 2009 compared to those in 2002. And also what we're very carefully tracking is our remediation rates. For those of you who have been following any of the New York City or local newspapers, and even the national conversation has been around, okay, so you graduated them, they went on to college, but were they ready to do the academic work needed to be successful? And we have seen a steady decline in our remediation rates at CUNY since 2002. Now, that being said, that's only about 50%, and we know that we need to improve that and get that down. And that's the focus of the coming year and years in order to make sure that our academic courses are rigorous in order to meet the so that our students are not in need of remediation when they go on to college. So looking at school accountability in New York City, again, we go back to those 3 E's: evaluate, enforce, and enable. And within those 3 areas, we talked a little bit about that. But in the evaluation, which we'll go into a minute, we're going to highlight progress reports and quality reviews. Also, things that we look at around the evaluation are school surveys, which is one of the largest census surveys in addition to the census in the United States. The University of Chicago also does a very large survey, but it's on a sample, not the way that New York City does it. So we have 1.1 million students. We have over 800,000 responses from parents. It's amazing. We have the federal and state evaluation, which that is from New York State Education Department, and they also, in order for schools to make adequate yearly progress targets, they do also measure our students, our schools, and our students' progress. We look at the consequences, the outcomes of these measures. We look at rewards. If schools are successful, if school leaders are successful, if teachers are successful, there are monetary bonuses. But there are also consequences for consistent failure of schools not getting their students to make progress and gains. And those can lead to restructuring or phase out of chronically failing schools. And that conversation is going on next door when we're talking about school turnaround models. We really are working, as Jeff indicated, part of my role as a state education department liaison is to work through aligning city and state policies. Now, it's only a little phrase, but you can imagine how difficult that can be between bringing both of these organizations together. But it's so important that we align those measures so that schools are not confused or conflicted by what one measure is saying against another. And we are not there yet, I can assure you, but we are working towards that alignment, particularly with Race to the Top, which we'll talk about a little bit too. But we don't want our schools to be helpless in all this, that this is done to them and at them, but not for them. And so we enable schools with tools that help them meet their progress. We provide them with a suite of periodic assessments. We have hands-on data training and use of collaborative teacher teams. We have, and I'll highlight for you, and many of the educators here from New York City can even talk about this, our achievement reporting and innovation system called ARIS, which is a state-of-the-art data student information system, and we're going to showcase that a little bit down the road here. And also, through our ARIS platform, we enable schools to do knowledge sharing. If you think about in a classroom, there's so much knowledge in a school, but it's all in that building, all in that class. And what we're trying to do is get that information shared with other schools, share best practices, and we're using that through our ARIS platform. Okay, Katie.
Hi, everyone. So Jen mentioned the different types of tools that we provide our schools with to help them track how well they're doing and where they can go from there. And two, perhaps, of the most comprehensive tools that we think we have at the moment are the progress report and the quality review. So here is a snapshot of the progress report. And just as there are 1 million students in our school system, over 1 million, and at the end of each year they get their grades on their report card, their A, B, C, D, or hopefully not F, we feel the need to hold ourselves accountable as well. So each year, starting in 2007, the schools received a grade, a similar letter grade of A, B, C, D, or F. And as you can see at the top left here, this A, this is a great school here, got their ultimate grade of A. But there are subcategories that we look at to help determine what that ultimate score will be. And so on the next slide, I'm going to take a bit of a deeper dive into what those 4 subcategories are and how much weight or importance we put on them. Okay. So you see in the block at the top, this is the overall grade you saw on the previous slide, that A that they got. But we realize that there are a lot of factors that determine what makes a good school. So first and foremost, we have school environment. This is worth 15 points out of the total 100 points. And the metrics are a bit different for elementary and middle school relative to high school, but when it comes to school environment, we're looking at the same types of things. Jen mentioned this school survey, the school environment survey. We want to know from the parents, the teachers, the students, do they feel comfortable in their school? Do they feel safe? Do they feel this is a good environment to be learning in? We also want to look at attendance. Are they actually going to this school that they like so much? So that's 15 points that comes into your score. And then 25 points goes to overall student performance. And as most of you probably know, under No Child Left Behind, they're looking at actual student performance. Do our students reach a level of proficiency on our state tests, most notably in math and English? So 25 points go towards that for the children in elementary and middle school, so children in grades 3 through 8. And then when we get to the high school level for determining high school progress reports, we're looking at these ultimate measures of success that Jen mentioned earlier. So that's graduation rates and whether they're really prepared to move on to what we hope they will move on to, which is a post-secondary institution. But here in New York, we really want to emphasize that it's not just are our students meeting this bar, this level of proficiency that the state requires us to report? And that's why you see in red 60 points are going towards progress, and that is where this whole name of progress report really comes in here. So again, we are looking at these state test scores, this ELA, that's English, Language Arts, and Math, but we're looking at progress over time. Are these students progressing? And not just progressing, but progressing past expectations. And in the next slide, I'm going to go into a bit how we determine what each school and each student should be expected to show gains in over the course of a year, and then how we determine whether they're exceeding their expected progress. Also, just to highlight, when it comes to high school progress reports, we don't have those state test scores, but we look at credit accumulation. Are these students on track to graduate on time in those 4 years? And we also look at whether they're passing their Regents exams, which is another measure of success for high school students. And then lastly, you see on the right, there's another 15 points extra credit. All the kids get extra credit, so why shouldn't we? So these are points that can be gained by a school when they really show exemplary performance with high needs populations. So there's different populations throughout the city that notoriously are harder to serve, and so if certain schools are standing out for serving these populations really well, closing the achievement gap that has been present for so long, then there's extra points to gain there. And so when you take that all together, it determines the school's overall grade that you saw in the previous report card. Now, there are a number of objectives that the progress report hopes to meet. First is really just to be able to look at student achievement on a broad scale. So again, it's not just test scores, we're incorporating a whole range of information, and we're getting data from a variety of sources to really bring it all together and see how are our kids doing. Second, we want to look at outcomes, not inputs. We want to evaluate our schools based on quantifiable data, and again, we want to measure their progress and performance. So we want to measure what the schools contribute to the students and not what the students bring to the schools. A school might have an advantage because they're just getting a certain type of kid, but that's not enough. We want to show that these schools are really having an impact on these kids and letting them move beyond perhaps what we expect their potential to be. And then lastly, I want to talk about this idea of peer and city comparisons. So we really focus in New York on this idea of peer schools. It's not enough to say that we expect 2 middle schools in the Bronx to both increase X number of degrees in a given year. That's not necessarily fair because, as we know, every school has a different makeup. And if you look up on the far right, you see what would happen if we didn't control for certain factors. So on the x-axis, what we're calling the peer index is the percent of certain subpopulations in a given school. So we have percent of English language learners at that school. We have percent of students who fall under the special education category. We have percent Title I and percent Black and Hispanic students. And as you see, the higher the proportion of these students in your school, the lower average proficiency that you see. So what we have is this idea of the peer index, which controls for all of these factors and then factors into your progress report grade. So when we're saying how much are you progressing over the course of a given year, it's not you versus the city. It's not your school versus all of the other schools, even in your district. It's you versus your peer schools. So the other schools around you, 20 above you, 20 below you, so every school has a different peer school group. How are you doing relative to those schools to really level that playing field there? Okay, so that is our first major tool that we use, a major accountability tool. And as you probably gathered, a lot of this is quantitative data that goes into this progress report. We do use the surveys, but we also are quantifying what's on these surveys from the teachers and the parents and the students. So we want to acknowledge it's not all data is quantitative data. You also have to look at qualitative data. So another big tool we have here is what's known as the quality review. And what this is, it's an on-site, really in-depth 2 to 3 day review of how our schools are doing. So we have evaluators go into the schools, meet with the administrators, meet with people at the school and see how is this school really functioning. And then we take all of the data that's gathered, and I'll show you an example of a rubric on the next page of the different items we evaluate on. But we take all that information and give it back to the school in a really well laid out report. What are you doing well? Where are your areas for improvement? And making that data available throughout the city so everyone really is being held accountable. And just like on the progress report, you had an A, B, C, D, or F, for the quality review, you can score as well-developed, proficient, developing, or underdeveloped. Okay, so this next slide is, it's pretty busy, as you can see. I hope you can see it in the back, but it's an example of the rubric and the fundamentals that the quality review is really based on. So a person doesn't go around the school checking off this one rubric. There are a lot of subcategories, but these are really the core features of the quality review. So the people who go into the school and who are evaluating the school are looking at the instructional and organizational coherence of the school. They're seeing how well the school is doing at gathering and analyzing their own school's data, and we'll show you that a bit later on how schools can do that, especially through the use of ARIS, which Jen mentioned. How well are these schools planning and setting goals for their students and for their school as a whole? How well are they aligning capacity building, and how well are they able to monitor the progress of their school, what's going on in their school, and then revise accordingly? If they see that things aren't going well, how are they revising that to make sure it starts to go well, okay? And then Jen's just going to jump in here and explain to you, now that we have all these tools, we have all these measures, we graded the schools, what do we do with these numbers, okay?
So here's where the second E comes in within enforce. And here is where the consequences are. When schools are not being successful for multiple years, they do face consequences, and in those cases there can be phase-out decisions. And when we're thinking about a phase-out, many people may refer to that distinctly as a closure, as a school closure. We're looking at this as the school has not been successful with its students for multiple years, and now we need to take steps to replace that school. And what we will do is begin to phase out the school grade by grade and allow the students who, in particular in the high schools, allow those students to finish at that phase out school. But we're going to, part of our strategy, and again that was next door also, is about how do we build new small schools that can really work with students on a very day-to-day, very frequent basis, and really give that one-on-one attention that our students need. So when we're looking, what triggers a school to be acknowledged as being a possible school that we would want to identify for phase out? And that would be both our progress report. If we see schools that are D and an F, or schools that have many consecutive years of being a C, we will begin to flag those as triggering as schools that we need to now watch more carefully or recommend that for closure. Other things that we look at are the quality review. If a school has an underperforming score, we will look at that as well. And finally, New York State also releases those schools that are persistently low achieving. And those are the bottom 5% of schools in all of New York State. Those are identified, and those can be potential schools for the phase-out process, as well as high schools with graduation rates below 60% for 3 years in a row. And if we look at that continuum, if we go back to that first or second slide where we looked at those graduation rates, those are well below the citywide average of nearly 65–68% where we are now. Other factors, so we don't just do this arbitrarily and on one data point. We take multiple data points into consideration. We look at school performance over time. So again, it's not just you didn't have success this past year, we're going to phase you out immediately. We look at multiple years and multiple progress indicators to see if it was some sort of extenuating circumstance for this one year. We look at, for high schools in particular, we look at demand. Do students want to attend this school? If all of these factors we see, the school is underperforming, and students we see are not wanting to apply to that school and we can't enroll students, that is a key factor for us, right? Supply and demand, it's very important. That's why we provide choice to our students. There could be other structural factors that are taken into account when we're looking at this kind of decision. For instance, how many years the principal has been there, the school size, and any particular concentrations of a school population. Finally, we look at what are the replacement options for this school. Is it viable for us to consider that to be a phase-out campus or phase-out school? And finally, we do this with multiple groups and stakeholders really looking very carefully at these decisions, including both, and ultimately the chancellor, you see him and soon to be her at the bottom of the screen as one of the final decision makers here. But we also go to the community. We meet with them early and continuously to talk about this process, to get them sort of wrapped around it, because school is personal, education is personal, and these are hard decisions. And you know, for a school and community to think through, we work with the community superintendents and the networks to really help the community think through this process. Okay. But now let's go to the more positive work that we do. We'll lighten it up a little bit. But all of these things are important for us to be able to be very transparent with the information. But most importantly, these things can't exist unless we enable schools to actually work through these issues. So part of our pillar around accountability is also inquiry, and we have really built to establish collaborative inquiry in the schools and provide a real team teaching approach. So we thought I'm going to jump back to Katie. She's going to talk a little bit about that and then showcase some of the other tools.
Okay, so as Jen mentioned, we don't really want to get to the point where we're considering phase out. We want to use these tools I talked about before to help our teachers and administrators make really smart decisions about their students to help move them forward. So we have these collaborative inquiry teams throughout the school system. And I'm going to go through the four main pieces of collaborative inquiry, and then the next slide is really going to show you how this is a cyclical process and how it's really ongoing and how it can really help. So collaborative inquiry, it's really focused on student outcomes using a systematic data approach. So the thing we really need to do here is teach our teachers how to use student data to drive their decision making. And then when we show you the tools, namely ARIS, it's going to really give you a better sense of what we're giving to teachers and saying, here's how you can use your student data. Now do something with it, and we'll help you along the way figure out what to do with it and how to make decisions based on what you're seeing. Because not necessarily is it the case that every teacher in our entire school system is going to know what to do with a whole host of quantitative data. We're talking about student test scores on the state test, but also on individual class level and all different factors. So we have teams of teachers get together and focus on how to handle students who are struggling, what they can do, but they're really doing this in a team environment, so no one is alone in this process. They're all sharing the different things they've learned along the way with one another. And we're really trying to develop and deepen really rigorous research-based instruction. And we're trying to also distribute leadership. So again, you're not just one teacher in one classroom in one school throughout this city. There are so many students here. People need to really all be in this together. So this next slide is showing you what I mean by a cyclical approach. And if you want to pick a starting point in this circle, I guess perhaps the best place to start, because of what I've been talking about, is examining student work and data. So looking at the data and trying to get it into a format that is best suitable for doing something with it, for figuring out patterns in the data, figuring out who's struggling. Have I seen a pattern in who's struggling? What were they doing last year relative to this year? How can I help? but it's also examining teacher work. So what am I doing, and how can I connect that to what my students are or aren't learning? And perhaps what I think, maybe what I come up with as a great lesson for how to teach the area of a triangle, I think it's really great, but then I'm able to look at my student data and I see only a third of the class was able to pass my quiz on that. So, can I put those two data pieces together and say, what now? And that brings us to the next stage in the circle, engaging external resources. So a lot of these tools, like the different versions of ARIS, are there to help our teachers. So they can go in to ARIS and say, did anyone else have an idea for how to teach area of a triangle that I might not have tried before? And did it work for them? Maybe I'll try that next time and incorporate that. So that goes along with defining instructional strategies, setting goals. So maybe they say, by the end of the semester, I want to make sure that 100% of my kids can define the area of a triangle. So they're setting targeted goals, just like we set targeted goals throughout the city. Again, this flows into the next, which is taking action to implement instructional strategy, really using the tools we provide them, using that new piece of PD you found on ARIS, testing it out, and then going back to your data, your student data, and saying, well, did it work out? Now what percentage of my students are able to figure this out? And if it did work, not just keeping that to yourself, that's part of this whole thing of working in a team, going back and sharing that with others. So maybe you use that one lesson that you got from ARIS, that one tool about how to teach the area of a triangle, but you tweaked it a bit. You wanted to put your own spin on it, and you found that that really worked. Well, then you'll go back and you will share that with others. So the next teacher to come along who's having trouble with that, he or she can use what you've learned over time to really help hone their skills. So it's really our hope that we can provide our teachers with not just the tools like the progress report, but also a system that really brings teachers throughout the city together, teachers who may not ever physically see one another. A lot of these are professional development sessions that are online or web-based tools, but really trying to, highlight this idea of working in collaboration with one another, hence the term collaborative inquiry. And Jen's going to highlight some of the fun features of this next tool, this ARIS tool. It's just a data snapshot. There's a whole lot behind it, and we definitely encourage you to go and take a deeper look on our website on the various pieces of ARIS.
So for those of you who've worked in schools or in classrooms, one of the biggest complaints that teachers have is that they don't have all of the data in front of them to help drive instruction. So the screenshot that we see here, and I think you have jump drives of our presentation so that you could probably see it a little bit better because it looks a little blurred from here. Here's an example of a class roster that a teacher could log in. And what they would have are the students' names. It would identify whether they had an IEP or any other learning need that they would have. And then next to it would be their attendance and their year-to-date attendance, plus also what was their attendance last year, so that you have both historical information as well as current information, and it's color-coded in a way that helps teachers identify where there may be areas of concern. Then as you go further, you have the assessment results, and this here is just the assessment results, the absolute performance of the students, but we do have other screens where you can dive in deeper and get to more granular information around the state test results. Next to that are the next few columns, just on this one screen, are students' performance on their diagnostic or formative assessments. So you see how it's really all very well laid out on that page. And that's just, again, one little snapshot of the broader ARIS system. Other things that, that a teacher can do with this, and we also have the counterpart, I should say, is called ARIS Parents Link, and parents can look at this information too. Parents are provided with a login information, and they too can see all of their students' information. Again, being accountable for the results, you need to understand and see those results in order to take action. So in on this platform, in addition to teachers being able to view all of their students' information plus contact information, they can examine the student data in charts and graphs, or how you like the data is how you can get the data, kind of thing. There are other platforms within ARIS where you can engage in the inquiry with folks outside of your school. Within your school, you're going to use this, and you're going to be poring over the data in your team teaching approach, but then you can collaborate outside the classroom and outside the school, and also share resources. You can upload lesson plans and materials and best practices that you found through this system. Remember, we have 1,500 schools in New York City, so we'd have to, Yankee Stadium actually wouldn't be large enough. I'm not sure Giant Stadium, or is it Jet Stadium? For me, it's Jet Stadium. Wouldn't be large enough either to accommodate all of these groups and peoples. And Corinne must be a Giant fan because she's grinning at me. So what's to happen next? Let's finish on that, so this way we can open it up to some question and answers from the group. Okay, so there was a little graphic there that I forgot about. So the first thing is, many of you may have heard about the Common Core state standards. New York State has adopted the Common Core state standards. Those will be the national standards moving forward. And right now we're in a process of building capacity around understanding what those standards look like. We currently have the New York State standards. In order for us to get to a place where our teachers have internalized the Common Core state standards, we have a lot of work to do. New York, some folks who are familiar with them are shaking their heads. The Common Core state standards are really, it's really K-16, it's not K-12. It's really a benchmark in order for our students to be prepared for college and career readiness. New York State is going to be changing their state tests to align with those Common Core state test standards, and they're going to begin sprinkling those standards into assessments in school year 2011-2012. And it will be completely operational, these new tests aligned to the Common Core state standards in 2014-2015. So we have a lot of work to do along the way, but I assure you it's going to be a bumpy road. And again, the goals of these new assessments are really for students to be able to synthesize, analyze, evaluate information in a much more higher order way than where our state standards have typically ended. This really brings that to the next level. And they will, the new assessments, when they are completed, are to really allow for accountability decisions to be made across a broad spectrum, including teachers, schools, and students. And obviously, that will improve our teaching and learning and prepare our students for college and careers. Just to move forward, many of you have heard about the Race to the Top grant competition by the United States Department of Education. New York State was one of the finalists, or actually one of the winners, and we look forward to receiving $240 million, almost $250 million within Race to the Top. And that is really to build the capacity of our schools, teachers, and principals and our students in order to meet the challenges that face us as we implement Common Core state standards. And that will also encounter, ARIS is a great system. Now we need to make sure that all of our schools across New York State have those kinds of data systems to support their work, and so some money will be spent there. And on teacher evaluation is a primary goal of Race to the Top, to bring in a fair and accurate assessment of our teachers. Okay. And finally, what we are doing this year in order to help 2014, 2015 sounds like a long time away, but there's 1,500 schools, 80,000 teachers, 1.1 million students. We have a lot of work to do in order to phase in this process. This year, we have already trained superintendents, network teams, and are now training teachers and principals on really how do we build that capacity? What are the Common Core state standards? What do they mean? And what do they mean to our teaching and learning in our schools? What kinds of practices do we need to change? And most importantly, the thing that we need to do now and start to really look look toward is how are we building capacity so that our students are not in need of remediation when they enter secondary post-secondary college and careers. And one interesting thing that we've done is we have a data sharing agreement with the City University for the past year and a half. All too often, our data or K-12 data goes to the universities, but we never know what happens. So we consider our memoranda of agreement with CUNY as landmark, because now what we're getting is information back on our students, and not just whether they enrolled or whether they persisted or graduated, but what courses did they take? How did they do on those courses? What was their GPA? And now we can think about what are the predictors of success in college. It's amazing. It's amazing and exciting work. And so hopefully when the next summit comes around, we'll be able to share so much of those findings with you. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jeff.
That was a lot to digest. I want to open it up to questions. Please, if you have a question, come to the mics, because although we probably hear you, this is being recorded. I appreciate it if primarily we focus on questions, but since many of you are coming from other systems and may be approaching some of these issues differently, I think we are interested in hearing also something about your experience. As long as, you know, as I don't get impatient if you're going on too long, I'll start squirming and send you a signal that way.
All right. Hi, thank you so much for the very thorough presentation on the accountability system in New York City. I'm from Rio. As his Rafael Parente, we work with the Department of Education for the city of Rio. And we were just wondering about this last thing you mentioned in passing of advancing on teacher evaluation and a fair and accurate way of assessing and evaluating whether a teacher is effective or not. So I'm wondering if you could give us some more information on where you're going with that and what would qualify as a fair and effective way of evaluating teachers.
So as you know, that's a hot topic in New York City about teacher evaluation. For those who may not be aware, teacher evaluation is a much debated national conversation that's going on, is how to evaluate teachers accurately and effectively. We currently right now use a value-added approach for our teachers in grades 4 through 8 who have multiple years of data to make judgments using English language arts and math scores. However, we are participating in a national study with the Gates Foundation to understand what are the measures of effective teaching and what other information we can bring to bear to understand this more holistically, this approach. And that's also part of the race to the top dollars, is to build an evaluation system that can support and build on the work that we've done around the value-added models. There's a good study that came out yesterday from the Brookings Institute about the value of value-added metrics, but also what else do you need to make a well-rounded system.
Hi, my name is Roy. I'm from Jerusalem. We have a system fairly similar in a way. We have a dashboard. Well, we are students of Joel Klein for a few years, so we have the chance of doing that. Part of our discussion in Jerusalem is what is usually measured is what's fairly easy to measure, and that's graduation results and results of national tests. And that is easy, fairly easy to measure. We have the results and we track the numbers. But as we learned in the morning, education is not only about graduation from high school. It's about capacity building. It's about believing in yourself. It's about a variety of values that you want. If you want a good citizen to come out of high school, it's not only that he has graduated math and English and science. And so the main discussion we have with principals and teachers is that they're saying, look, you track us for results of graduations, which is okay, and we know that we can improve, and sometimes in bad ways. For example, letting go the weak students, and then our results will be great because we were letting them go. So do you have discussion? And part of what we are trying to do now is asking what can we measure beside graduation? Because otherwise we are tilting you're saying education is about graduation. And if we want principals to teach capacity building values and other important stuff beside knowledge transformation, then how can you measure that? And do you have any thoughts on the matter?
So that also is something that we were on a panel last week where we even, Jeff, were you at the retrospective at the panel presentation?
But not on yours, yeah.
Oh, so where that was debated also, where if you looked at our elementary and middle school progress report, it is quite a bit weighted on the English language arts and mathematics scores. One way to, and we understand there is science and social studies are very important, the arts, and how do we bring those into our accountability system? Part of the difficulty in that is that we don't have annual assessments from the state longitudinally. So we have a 4th grade science test and we have an 8th grade science test. We really want to measure the progress of students. In order to measure the progress of students from year to year, we need a year-to-year assessment. But we really want to think about how do we broaden the spectrum. That's why we do have the survey. The school survey becomes an important factor. It's 15 points of the overall progress report grade because we know that school climate, the expectations that the adults in the building have for their students is very important and becomes a factor in student achievement at the school. So we use that as one of the broadening factors. Also, the quality reviews are another way that we can get to what's happening at the school. What is the school doing? So it's not just an absolute outcome, whether that's a progress or a performance measure. At the high school level, we actually have it's a little more well-rounded because we can look at credit accumulation from year to year of students. And when we're looking at the examinations, we can look at a multitude of the examinations, not just English and math, but all of the graduation requirements, which are in 5 subject areas, again with the survey and with the quality review. But we are always looking to explore and open that up. One thing that we are adding, and it was announced yesterday, is we're going to be adding college readiness indicators on the high school report cards so that we can look at how are our schools preparing those students for college and careers. Thank you.
Kelly Burling from Pearson. Is this one on too? I have a couple questions, so I'll try it to be fast. The first is the survey you discussed. Is that internally created somewhere in the City Department of Education? And what sort of correlates do you see between survey results and test score results and your other growth measures, if any? And then also, what are your growth measures? You said compared to median growth, is this a cohort that you're looking at? Or are you just looking at the increase in percentage of kids proficient per year? What was that growth measure that you're using?
Sure. So now I lost the first question because I was focused on the second.
The survey.
Oh, the survey. Got it. Okay. So the surveys were initially done by an outside company, but now we have, for the most part, brought those indicators in-house, but we created the survey both with educators and researchers across the city and across the country to help inform the questions and the pieces. We looked at the University of Chicago in particular, who had already a similar survey implemented, but they, again, sample, and we wanted to make sure that everybody had the opportunity to respond from families. And also we have teachers responding too. When we look at the correlates, those things do correlate with our indicators of progress and such. One thing that we would like to look at, which we would want to think about, is does that change over time depending on the status of your school? And I think that that's something that we want to explore going forward. And we're also looking at different studies about whether or not we can build a real climate index out of, and I think that's where you were going for, out of the survey measures. Right. And then on, I think we want to just talk about our proficiency ratings. Katie, do you want to answer that a little bit?
Sure. So I'm not sure if this 100% answers your question, but in terms of what our outcome measures are, it really focuses around this idea of the peer index and making sure that we are only comparing our schools, any given school, to the schools that are really in its peer group. And so this will change from year to year. It'll change school to school. There is no one school that has the same exact peer group as the other, because purposefully we make sure that that school's scores are the median for their peer group at the starting point, and then we're able to track how they're doing relative to the rest of the schools in their group, both the 20 schools that are above them and the 20 schools that are below them at their baseline. And the baseline, of course, changes from year to year.
I think part of the question was also whether it's scale scores or proficiency levels.
Right.
And
They are. We call them proficiency. I'm not.
Well, so I don't know how familiar everyone is with this, but when we talk about whether a student meets proficiency on our state test scores, that's do they reach a level 3? So there's level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4, and that's the ultimate cutoff. However, we like to take that a step further, because grouping our students, our million students, into 4 buckets doesn't necessarily seem the most straightforward way to do things. So we have a range ranging from 1 to 4.5 on a 100th of a point scale. And so a student in any given class could get, if he or she is a 2, she could be a 2.01 or a 2.99. And so when we're developing what our peer schools are, it's not just what proportion of students in that school are reaching proficient, meaning reaching a level 3 or higher. We look at their exact average peer proficiency index rating. So a school might have an average of 2.67, 3.45.
But that's basically a transformation from our scale scores. That's where I got tripped up on my words. So tests are made up of scale scores and performance levels. And scale scores almost feel like, for those of you researchers in the room, standard scores kind of feel like that awful black box that nobody understands, and how does it work? So what we did is we transformed those scale scores into proficiency ratings, which just really said, you're level 1, you could be a level 1.1, a level 1.2, etc. So it just made them more real, but it translates to the scale scores. And then we look at the students for this year, and we looked at their percentile rank among all of the scale scores, so we could look at movement from year to year, and that enabled us to stabilize the system, because there was a lot of movement around the state tests. So if we saw the percentile rank from one year compared to the percentile rank of the next year of a student, we could normalize some of the bounce in the test scores that we were seeing.
I'm Robert Voorhammer from the city of Antwerp in Belgium. I was wondering, if I understood well, you're measuring the graduation scores on time. This means that you put a lot of emphasis on the on time. Now in Antwerp, for us, the main priority is graduation. We cope with a lot of immigrant students, and we have a problem of a certain percentage. It's up to 15% that don't graduate high school. So we try to diminish this percentage, or to increase the percentage of that have a graduation. But we don't regard in the first place if it's on time, because a lot of these students start with a different starting point, with different capacities, and I wonder whether you take this into account.
Yeah, well, we couldn't agree more. If I could just respond to that, in particular for our English language learners, the next important marker after we see the 4-year outcome is to see how many of those students are still enrolled, because our 5th and 6th year rates, which we also track carefully and follow, we know are so important, because it's even more important that these students are staying in school and persisting up through when at 21 is when they eventually age out of the school system. But and under No Child Left Behind, they are wanting to also extend the accountability so that we look at fifth and sixth year rates, because we acknowledge that that's a critically important, especially for our special needs populations.
Yeah. And I have a second question. You will excuse me, but it's about the phase out of schools. I have two questions. The first is, how long does it take to phase out a school once you're going through? And the second is, you replace it, I frequently hear that you replace it by smaller schools. Don't you have a capacity problem?
Not yet. But Anthony chuckled there.
It's very interesting to replace it by a new school. It's drastic, but it's very efficient, I think. But to replace it by a smaller school, it's kind of a structural approach. But in my city, we're struggling with a capacity problem for all schools. We need to build new schools, and so yeah.
So I think one thing that we should talk about is that when we're opening and closing schools, we're not really talking about brick and mortar. So we're not building, we're not building something here and then taking down a building. What in New York City, what existed in many in other places as well, is that our schools were rather large, and they were upwards of 1,500 students, and sometimes 2,000, 3,000 students. In many of those cases, those are very, very large buildings. So the schools, when we go to do a phase out, and I'll get your question about how that phase out works, we're able to begin a school where one large one once belonged. What we're doing is able to have smaller schools coexist. And there was a very large national study done on our small school movement from MDRC that really showed the success of these first cohorts of our small schools, and I would invite you to take a look at that. But that's how that works. So we're actually not physically building something, but really working and breaking up a oftentimes larger schools into smaller schools within that building that can coexist. And just like any family, sometimes the coexistence works better than others, but we have worked through ways to enable those schools to be successful and share many of the resources within that school. Around the phase out, once it's decided as a community that and by the chancellor that the school will indeed be phased out, what that means is that the school will no longer take incoming students into that school. And phasing out means that they will allow those students who are still in the building to finish up until their grade level is no longer. It's usually typically in the high schools where I can use the best example, where we have a 9th grade through 12th grade school, and so once it's decided that that school will indeed phase out, they won't take any more 9th graders, so now there'll be a 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. The following year there'll be an 11th and 12th grade, then there'll be a 12th grade, and then until they are completely phased out. So it's a multi-pronged approach. Similarly, that's how we phase in our new small schools. We first take an incoming 9th grade, then it goes 10th grade, and that helps to build the capacity of that new smaller school as well.
I'm in a phase out. I'm a new school in a phase
Oh, come.
This will be our last question comment.
It's not. I'm actually in a new school in a phase out. My phase out closed down 2 years ago for failure because the progress report was consistently a D time and time again. And the learning environment survey was very low. The parents were not happy with what was going on in the school. So I proposed a new school, and it was a K-8 school in the Rockaways that was closed down, and I'm the elementary school. And right now, last year, we started pre-K to 3rd. There was also a new middle school that went in and started with just grade 6. This year, we're pre-K, and the phase out was 4, 5, 7, 8. This year, I'm pre-K to 4. The new middle school is 6 and 7, and the phase out, this is the final year, is 5 and 8. And then next year it'll just be the 2 schools coexisting. We work together, all 3 principals. We divide the space up. We have common space time. For us, it's working really well. We have a very good building council where all the 3 principals work together. And, we are doing really well. So if anyone wants to come visit our school, invitation's open. It's a really beautiful place to visit. So.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you all to thank our panel. That'll be the end of today.